Good morning, everyone. We're going to start the West Coast Committee meetings. Pretty long. Before I call the meeting to order, I'd just like to recognize in our committee room we have Terry Fong and Wendy Thompson as well. And I'd like to call the meeting to order and recognize the fact that we're all over the place on the island, so I recognize the traditional territories of the New Chalnooth First Nations. Further, the attendees and delegates of this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube and the regional district website. First order of business is the approval of the agenda. I'd like a motion to receive.
I can move the
Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Tom. Item 3 is first of all those in favor. Thank you. Next item is the West Coast Committee meeting of August 24th, 2021. I have a motion that the minutes of the West Coast Committee meeting held on August 24th, 2021 be received. Thanks again, Tom. Item 4 is petitions, delegations, and presentations with a 10-minute maximum. We have Myrna Moore, Senior Manager, Government Relations, and Melissa Coates, Transit Planner, BC Transit Update on the West Coast. Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. We're happy to be here to give an update to the West Coast Committee on the Tofino Ucluelet proposed transit service. I understand you had a meeting in June previously and have had some information to date regarding the information that came back from our request for informations for operating companies. What we'd like to do is just give you an update through a PowerPoint, short PowerPoint, and then open it to question and answers.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So we're just going to start by kind of jumping into the service plan update and just going over some of the information and recommendations from the request for information that was released earlier this spring. So we released our request for information in April 2021. This is to help inform our future requests for a proposal for a service operator. And the main purposes of this were how to approach maintenance of vehicles on the West Coast and potential facility options and locations. So in terms of an operations and maintenance facility, the recommendations from the RFI are kind of broken down into 2 phases. So the suggested first phase would be maintenance being provided through a third-party operator. And from what was examined, this would likely be in Port Alberni based on the lack of availability of maintenance in the West Coast area. And then with that, we would secure spaces to park buses on the West Coast, but have the vehicles be maintained likely in the Port Alberni area. And then a second phase would likely look like purchasing or leasing land and being able to construct a facility that would support the maintenance of vehicles on the West Coast. There is some suggested cost-effective options in the RFI, and noting the need to support our future rollout of battery electric bus, and then eventually transitioning the successful proponent for an operating company to in-house maintenance. And then in terms of fleet, the outcomes from the RFI suggested to proceed with using light duty vehicles, with a previous recommendation being medium duty vehicles. This is largely due to the maintenance of the vehicles. So being able to find a third-party maintenance provider with light duty vehicles was noted to be less of a challenge than with a medium duty vehicle. So with this, 5 vehicles are recommended for the suggested service levels. And this is also including maintenance occurring in Port Alberni. So if that were the case, there were to be the additional vehicle in Port Alberni for a long-term, if this was occurring. So then if a bus were to go in to get maintained in Port Alberni, there would be an extra vehicle available to come down and provide service to the West Coast. And then this is just an overview of the routing that we've confirmed as of last year in the 2020 version of the service plan. And then as well, the estimated service levels from the 2020 service plan. So none of these things have changed. Just a reminder, and then this also informs the most recent costing that we've done. So these service levels would be more frequent in the peak season, May to October, and then less frequent in the winter months. So with that, as I mentioned previously, this would include 5 vehicles. And with those suggested service levels, we're looking at an estimated net municipal share of about 418,000. And the estimated revenue was based, assuming a $2 cash fare for this purpose. So the next steps working towards implementation of the service would be going out for a request for proposal for a service operator, creating a fare strategy and getting that approved, and then getting confirmation of provincial funding early next year in 2022. And then this is when we'd create an implementation memorandum of understanding. And then we would dive into the more detailed schedule development and working towards that service implementation. And finally, this outlines a tentative implementation plan in more detail, what we would follow upon indication of funding early next year. So as of right now, the final route timing has been complete. And then this outlines the steps we would follow for a tentative September 2022 implementation date. Again, of course, contingent on provincial funding. That concludes our presentation. So I'm just going to stop sharing so we can open it up for questions and answers.
Thank you for that, Rochelle. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, ladies. Appreciate the presentation. I'm wondering what happens, so contingent on provincial funding, and what does that look like should the provincial funding not be, you know, best case scenario? How does that actually play out?
So thank you for the question. This is always part of what we do with our 3-year transit expansion rolling program. We reach out to all of our local partners to basically sign their transit improvement program MOU letter, which has been done with the Alberni-Claypot Regional District. What we do is we take all of the signed letters back from all of our local partners across the province, and we build a service plan to the Ministry of Transportation as one package. Then the province usually looks at announcing their provincial budget in February, and then we know basically what the province is willing to commit to matching the service plan, the annual service plan that we look at for the province. What we've seen in the past several years is that usually our service plan gets approved by the province. If it comes back and there is a process where it's a shortfall to what our service plan is asking for budget, we would go through a process of evaluating each of the transit initiatives on expansion to determine priorities. And we go through a priority list based on many different variables. We see that the Tofino Ucluelet service is one that would have high marks, so to speak, in that evaluation process. You currently have no transit service operating at all. All of the other expansions that we're looking at have a base service, and they're looking at an extension to what they already have in place. So we would go through a process that we call a transit effectiveness program, and we would look at all of the requests from our local partners and determine a priority list or a multiple account evaluation to see how the provincial dollars would get allocated. And we see the Tofino Ucluelet service as one that would rank very high in that. What we have done in the past also, and you're very familiar with it, with the COVID pandemic year and a half, a lot of the expansions got deferred by a year. That could be potentially another outcome. We can't really predict that, but that's generally the process that does happen if the province comes back and would not maybe match all of the local government requests for budget through their transit improvement program.
Thank you very much. Just one follow-up question. Will you be presenting those same slides to the District of Eagle and probably the District of Tofino? I don't know if we've seen the newest, seen that,
I would defer that to Eddie. We've not yet actually done just the municipal presentations. We are working through the working group with staff, but we have not yet been asked. That could be a possibility, but that is not something that has been requested so far.
If I may, through the chair, just follow up on that one. We're just in the process of setting up a meeting in the next couple of weeks with the District of Tofino and the District of Ucluelet. And I'll be reaching out to Myrna at that point once we have a date to see if we can present those slides as well.
Great, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Councillor Director Cole asked the two questions that I was concerned about. Would it be possible also to, for our own information, I do give updates to council on the ACRD and West Coast Committee meetings. If I could have that slideshow sent to, well, to all the West Coast Committee members, of course. The one side question would be is in terms of the time frame for the rollout, and with September of 2022 looking at the likely or hopeful date, one of the issues that we've recently had in Tofino was the rollout of our parking initiative, and it was important for us to get it rolled out during that busy season to understand where some of the gaps or potential areas of improvement might be necessary. And I'm wondering if that rollout date, based on what you laid out in that quick slide, if there's any realistic opportunity to have that rollout begin previous to the busy season that we experience here on the West Coast, to get a better idea of sort of usage levels and the ability to look for those potential gaps or problems that might exist in the delivery of the service.
Okay, so I guess what I think you're asking is, it could be sooner than September 22?
In my long-winded way, yes, that is exactly what I was asking.
Okay, well, I would say that we're definitely on a fiscal calendar basis. You're on a calendar basis. We've built that into our process where we have to go through, once we know that funding's approved, we would be ordering buses. And so it's really tied into bus build and delivery. I would say it's very unlikely we would be able to see it sooner. There may be potential that it might be still within our fiscal, but a bit later than September. So in the MOU letter that we sent to the ACRD, it was a tentative delivery date between September 22 and January 23. And that's certainly contingent on the bus delivery. So it may be a little later than September into maybe the early winter part. So does that still work with your effort to make it not at the key point of your parking initiative?
No, the hopefully the goal would be to roll it out sooner than later, obviously, to capture the ability to well, certainly with the revenue standpoint, of course, but also to identify those service level gaps that may be occurring, especially in those peak period times. The alternative of that, of course, is when you roll out in January, we may not be able to really ascertain the scheduling, the fare structure, the revenue potentials that I think will be critical information moving forward. It is just it was a hopeful request, and I understand the fiscal restraints that you're under. I was just wondering if there's any wiggle room within that potential budgetary process to expedite the process to move it a little quicker. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for that, Tom. I have a couple of questions to Myrna or Melissa. You talked about a $2 cash fare. Is there any potential for zone changes? Is it the $2 for the entire route? Firstly. Secondly, I see on the front of the buses, proposed buses, that there's bike racks. One of the issues on the West Coast clearly is surfers. And so is there potential to have surfboards on board as well, or a rack for them? And my last, I'll let you deal with that. And the route to Port Albion, I see, is limited. What is the time frame and for round trip, and how often we're going to Port Albion? Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thank you for this question. So firstly, in terms of fare, so for the costings, the $2 cash fare was just used as an estimate. For now, that we don't currently have a fare strategy in place for the service. So one of the next steps is to have our fare team here at BC Transit work to develop a fare strategy and present that for approval at a later date. So through that process, we can explore different options. And when we did public engagement a few years ago, we did collect some feedback on fare information. So that will be used to inform the production of a fare strategy. And the second question was in regards to surfboards. So yes, we definitely have heard that request throughout this entire process. So as of right now, especially with the implementation of light duty vehicles, they are a smaller vehicle, so not a possibility on a light duty vehicle. We did examine the possibility as well through the 2020 service plan with a medium duty vehicle. It was determined kind of through our fleet team that it's not possible at this time. However, it's something noted of high importance and something that we can continue to explore, not for implementation, but for some point post-implementation, and potentially with the use of a larger heavy duty vehicle. We don't currently provide any services that have surfboard racks on vehicles. So this would be something new for us. So it would be a large undertaking, but so it's something that we're going to continue to note and explore. And then to your third point, which was the routing to Port Albion and the Haitatsu area. So with this, kind of what we work through in the service plan is that there would be limited service to this area. So it would be approximately, I think, 4 trips a day for that service going to into that area, kind of deviating off the highway and going down in there. And then just noting the potential that we can continue to look at expanding service in the future depending on how we see things roll out with implementation.
Okay, thank you for that. And I appreciate your presentation, as has been mentioned. And I think the sooner this happens, the better. We want to limit traffic clearly on the highway. So I look forward to future talks when you have your talks with Euclid and Tofino local governments. So do appreciate it. Thanks, Myrna. And thanks, Melissa. Much appreciated. I
Thanks
should
very
say
much.
before we close, are there any other questions? I don't see any hands. So thanks again. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next item, is there any correspondence? Do we have anything? No correspondence.
No correspondence.
Thank you very much. Request for decisions and bylaws. The first request is regards to the Union of BC Municipalities evacuation route planning for the West Coast region. And I think I see Heather there. Hi, Heather. You know, thinking about that in terms of what we just discussed, the bus routes and buses, that should at some point potentially play an important role in it. But I'll let you go ahead. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you. So the report in front of you is a request for support for the board to apply for a grant opportunity through UBCM. So it's to propose to create an evacuation route plan for the entire West Coast, including the Long Beach electoral area and the Bamfield electoral area. We can also partner with other agencies on this grant application. So I've had some initial discussions with Huayet, Uchuclasset, Ukulithat, and Tokwat. And at the staff level, all four of those First Nation governments are interested in partnering on this grant application. The District of Ucluelet and the District of Tofino have previously received grant fundings under this program, so they're not eligible to partner with us. However, they would be included as a a stakeholder. And we would also send an invitation to Hesquiat, Ahousaht, and Toloquiet, as well as Parks Canada, to ask them to participate in this project. So there's up to $25,000 per project partner. I don't think that we would need to pursue, $100,000 grants, but somewhere under that amount. The evacuation route plan will identify evacuation routes for many emergency scenarios, but it will also consider things like what happens if Highway 4 is closed, because that's happened quite recently, and looking at alternative ways to evacuate communities. So the funding is 100% funded, so there's no matching funds required. The application is due in November, and we would hear by March if we were successful. So we would carry out this project in 2022. We're currently doing this same planning in the Alberni Valley, and I think it will help emergency agencies who need to respond in supporting the residents that need to evacuate or visitors that need to evacuate. So the recommendation in front of you is to ask the board to submit a grant application.
Thanks, Heather. Any questions? I don't see any. So the motion is that the West Coast Committee recommend that the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors apply to the Union of BC Municipalities Community Emergency Preparedness Program Fund for evacuation route planning for the Bamfield and Long Beach electoral areas with interested grant partners. I have a seconder.
Second.
Thanks very much. All those in favor? Approved. Thank you. The next item is a request for a decision with regards to the Long Beach Airport contamination. That the West Coast Committee recommend that the ACRD Board of Directors send a letter to Minister of Transport Omar Alghabra and MP Gord Johns requesting that Transport Canada fulfill their obligation for historical contamination of the Long Beach Airport. And I see Mark Fortune is there. Maybe you'd like to talk to that, Mark? Michael, sorry.
I think I'll take over if that's all right. Unless Mark has anything to add at the moment. Michael, I'll let you go first. Your name's on the report.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll provide a little bit of history on how we got to this point. I'm sure many of you are aware of the long history of the Long Beach Airport, and with that long history comes with some historical contamination concerns as well. So before the ACRD owned and operated the LBA, it was owned and operated by Transport Canada and the federal government. And at the time of transfer, the federal government did a number of environmental investigation works and remediation, and that's all laid out within a transfer agreement that was signed off between the ACRD and Transport Canada. And that was all done to the federal regulations at that time, so 20 years ago. As we continue to develop LBA, we're looking at a number of lease lots that we're looking at leasing out for longer than 3 years. And this requires us going through a process that's similar to a subdivision process. And that includes a environmental investigation. And if that environmental investigation identifies contamination that isn't risk managed or remediated, it's essentially not able to be subdivided. So we went through this process a little bit earlier this year with the stage 1 PSI. And this identified some new contamination of asbestos that was found in the ground. And this contamination wasn't addressed at the time of transfer. It wasn't recorded in the baseline report that was done by the federal government. And the ACRD staff's interpretation of the transfer agreement is that the federal government would be responsible for this historical contamination and addressing the remediation of it. So I've had a number of meetings with Transport Canada on this over the last 6 months, and Transport Canada's response to that is that at the time of transfer, the ACRD took it on as is. So we have not been able to make much progress in moving this concern forward, and we thought the next logical step would be to have our board of directors address the Minister of Transport and the local MP, and hopefully we're able to progress this a little bit through that means. And I think that's all I have for information right now. Are there any further questions?
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I can understand maybe the frustration that you've been experiencing over the last 6 months in dealing with the federal bureaucracy. I'm just curious, obviously you've made multiple inquiries and as you've indicated, hit a stone wall, so to speak. I'm wondering, is this obviously this is one step. Is there any other steps? Ironically, I met with Gord last week. And did throw this bug into his ear. He probably forgot immediately, but is there anything else that would be expedient for us to be doing either at the staff level or at the ACRD board level to help in the expedition of this request, other than the letter to the minister and our member of parliament? Have you identified any other areas is my question.
I believe if we got a legal review and some recommendation on the transfer agreement, there's a number of clauses in there for dispute resolution, so that may be where this ends up. But at this point, I think a good faith, request is the way to go before we go into that.
Okay, and then would you need a board to move a legal review forward, or is that something you can do internally as staff?
I believe we can get a legal review as staff, but possibly entering into one of the dispute resolution clauses, we would probably get board direction before we do that.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments? Mark, do you have anything to add to that? Okay, thank you. Would somebody like to make that motion, please? Go ahead, Tom.
That the West Coast Committee recommend that the ACRD Board of Directors send a letter to the Minister of Transport, Omar Al-Gabra, and Member of Parliament, Gord Johns, requesting that Transport Canada fulfill their obligations for historical contamination at Long Beach Airport.
Do you have a seconder? Thanks, Rochelle. All those in favor? Carried, thank you. The next item is regards to the West Coast multi-use path funding, and I think, Michael, that's on your plate as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So sadly, in the last couple of weeks, we were informed that we were unsuccessful for our most recent grant application for the BC Active Transportation Grant Program. And essentially, the reason provided was that it would not fully fund the project. In this case, making it not shovel ready, where construction would begin after the grant funds were awarded. I had a meeting with the BC Active Transportation Grant team, and they're pretty supportive of the project. They say it grades high, they want to be partners, and they provided some guidance on how we could adjust our application and and for the next round of grant applications. So we're kind of in a chicken and egg conundrum here, where we're having trouble securing funding to fully fund the project because we don't have secured funding for the project. So I think we have a couple of options to move the project forward. And some of this was supported with our meeting with the BC Active Transportation Grant Program. It made me pretty optimistic that the 2022 funding stream, we would be able to be successful if we made a few adjustments to how we scope the project. So they suggested that we either provide the funding shortfall and demonstrate that once that $500,000 was awarded, we'd be able to begin our construction phase. So we could do that through allocating $550,000 through the community works funding, and then that would, assuming we get the ICT Stage 2 funding and the next round of BC Active Transportation Grant Program, that would have a fully funded project. But if we were unable to do that, then another option would be to stage the project, where still, if we're successful with Stage 2 of ICT funding and the Active Transportation 2022 round, we could fully fund Phase 1. So that'd be essentially most of the clearing and earthworks, and then we'd still pursue further funding for Phase 2, which is the asphalt and base. So either way, it's not all bad news, and I think that there's a route here to get this project funded and to begin construction in the near future still. But yeah, that's all I have for that, if there's any questions.
Thanks for that, Michael. Any comments or questions? Rochelle, go ahead.
Just a comment. Maybe we could take what we could get and then bet it all on black and just get her done. Double it down and never mind. Gambling joke. Thank you for.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I concur. That's sort of been my push for a bit with regards to finishing this. So the Prime Minister can hike and bike and cycle from Ucluelet to Tofino or wherever he wants, and anybody else for that matter as well. So can I have a motion, please, to put this forward? Thank you.
I'll move that the West Coast Committee requests the Electoral Area Directors Committee consider recommending to the ACRD Board of Directors the allocation of $550,000 of community works funding to complete the West Coast multi-use path. That if the Electoral Area Directors Committee does not support the allocation of community works funding to complete the West Coast multi-use path, the West Coast Committee recommends that the ACRD Board of Directors direct staff to develop a plan to phase the construction of the West Coast multi-use path to increase the chances of success during the next BC Active Transportation grant intake.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Michael, that's carried unanimously. So let's get on with it. Thank you. Next item is reports. Now we have a number of ex officio members, including Pacific Rim National Park, Howsett, Wolfwit, and Hesquit First Nations. We don't have any reports, but I'd like to reconfirm that all of these First Nations and the National Park are invited to attend and submit documentation for review or reports. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Is there any late business? Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Roberts. I'm just curious. Do we send out invitations, Zoom invites to the listed ex officio members?
Mr. Chair, through the chair, yes, we do. They're all invited as they do sit on this committee as non-voting members.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any late business?
I'm not aware of any, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the public?
Mr. Chair, we've had no questions or comments from the public today and no participants.
Thank you. Just a general comment that if anybody has been listening to our meeting, they can email their questions to the ACRD at response@acrd.bc.ca. Last item, motion to adjourn. Thank you, Kirsten. All those in favor? Have a good day, everyone. Nice to see your faces, but I hope to see you in person soon. I know Tom's coming in here tomorrow, so safe drive. Cheers. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.